Hey, what's going on, guys? Mush back at it with another video. As the PC market right now is still crazy, just about everything else included in terms of graphics cards. Consoles are still crazy. I know some of you guys still want to get a PC, so I thought I'd do a video taking a look at some of the best top pre-built PCs that you can get on Amazon for under $1,000. The $1,000 price tag threshold actually does put quite a bit of a limitation on it because graphics cards are so expensive right now. Pre-built PCs also go up in price, resembling the graphics card surge in price. But going pre-built is not an awful option right now. Obviously, ideally, I do recommend people to build their own PC, but with prices right now, I understand why it could be a little bit different. Let's start off with the highest price and work our way down. We got 5 PCs, and then I'll throw out a 6th option. We'll go as low as around $600. But starting things off, the $1,000 iBUYPOWER gaming PC, the Element MR9320, is actually not that bad. Intel i7 10700 at 2.9 GHz, and then you have an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1660 Ti, 6GB in it, 16GB of DDR4 RAM, so that's pretty huge, 240GB SSD, and a 1TB hard drive, so all things considered, I think this is pretty decent. I mean, given the relevance and the price of everything else right now. Just to give you guys an idea, let's look up the price of the 1660 Ti on eBay. Going for about $450 to $500, maybe a little bit more than that at times, but it's a pretty decent GPU, especially if you're gaming at 1080p. I mean, 1080p, it's going to be a really solid GPU. And then even if you go up to 1440p, it can do pretty decent at that too. But 1080p is where it's really going to shine, and a 240GB SSD along with a 1TB hard drive gives it a really solid storage configuration, and then 16GB of DDR4 RAM is solid as well. All in all, a pretty decent pre-build for a grand, all things considered. Okay, next up, going a little bit cheaper for $925, you can get the SkyTech Blaze 2 with a Ryzen 5 2600 6-core 3.4 GHz CPU, which is pretty good. NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1660 Ti 6GB, so literally a similar GPU there. And then a 500GB SSD, 8GB of DDR4 RAM. You get Windows 10 on there as well, Windows 10 on the last PC as well. $925 is pretty decent. The only thing holding it back, 8GB of RAM. While serviceable now, you are ultimately going to need 16GB at some point, and it looks like it's single channel, which isn't fantastic, meaning it's a single stick. But a 500GB SSD, while that's not ideal either, it still would probably be enough for a lot of people. Me personally, that's a little bit limiting, and I probably would like to have, another hard drive there, whether it be an external or something like that. But if you're looking for key applications going on in SSD, that's 500GB, that's serviceable. The Ryzen 5 2600 still pretty decent. 1660 Ti here is pretty good, and, having the OS there is always a pretty decent. So $925, not ideal in all regards, but pretty decent considering the circumstances. Okay, we have a couple of $800 options here. The first one I do want to go over is the CyberpowerPC Gamer Xtreme. This has an Intel i5 10400F at 2.9 GHz, a GTX 1660 Super 6GB, 8GB of DDR4 RAM, and a 500GB NVMe. That is $800, which, a 1660 Super is pretty good. We can look up the price of that right now on eBay, and I guarantee you it's going to be pretty ridiculous, but, to give you guys an idea of how much it factors into the overall machine, you're looking at around the same $450, $500. Some of these listings are north of $500, but yeah, around $450 to $500. So $800 to get everything else that this PC has, I think is pretty good. You get the OS, CPU is pretty decent. 8GB of DDR4 RAM, again, that's a little bit of a bummer. That's probably going to require an upgrade at some point. It's still serviceable now, and it's not going to be too much of a limitation, but at some point, you do want to go the 16GB route. But that's probably not going to be essential for at least a little while. And I'm probably even overplaying how important it is. I just like to have 16GB in a higher end build, but $800 in the current climate, that is a pretty budget-oriented rig, and you kind of are to expect an 8GB configuration, which again, completely serviceable now, and is still pretty decent. The 500GB NVMe is also pretty solid, but again, your mileage is going to vary depending on whether or not, how much you can get out of a 500GB SSD. Okay, the SkyTech Blaze 2, Ryzen 5 2600 6-core 3.4 GHz, and NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1660 6GB, 500GB SSD, and 8GB of DDR4 RAM. So this is the alternative option if you do want an AMD CPU for a similar price, $800, a little bit lesser of a GPU by the looks of it, being a vanilla 1660, but still pretty good for 800 bucks. Probably would go the CyberPower route with this one. Okay, next up, I do want to give a $700 build a mention. The iBUYPOWER Gaming PC. This has a Ryzen 5 3600, so that's really good, 3.6 GHz, and AMD Radeon RX 5500 XT. So this is another GPU from my recollection is relatively expensive. Let's give you guys the exact price of the 4GB model. That should be noted. It's going for around $350, $400. Looks like $400 is about the expectation for that. So yeah, pretty expensive. 8GB of DDR4 RAM, a 240GB SSD. Okay, now this is a real limitation. 240 gigabytes I don't think is going to fly, so bear in mind you will have to buy a hard drive, whether it be external, whether it be something you put right in there. That is something to definitely consider, unless you really think you can get by with 240 gigabytes, and considering some games are, 50 gigabytes, 60 gigabytes, even 100 gigabytes for your war zones of the world, that is just going to be an extreme limitation, so bear that in mind. You can get configurations where you can have an external SSD and things of that nature, but just bear that in mind. Lastly, I do want to give a shout to the HP Pavilion Gaming Desktop. This is $630. This is like the cheapest you can get a relatively decent PC from what I can see. This has an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1650 Super, an Intel Core i3 10100, 8GB of DDR4 RAM, and a 256GB NVMe SSD. Again, 256GB, pretty limiting. But a 1650 Super is actually not that bad. If you're gaming at 1080p, you can get quite a bit out of a 1650 Super, and right now that's going for, around $400, 350 to 400, maybe 300 on the low end. Peg for around 300, 320 for the 1650 Super, so that included in this build I think is actually pretty decent. i3 obviously is not ideal, but I mean, it's still a quad core that's going to do pretty well. 8GB of RAM, again, serviceable for now. The real limitation, again, is that SSD, 256GB. Yes, you can download a game or two, maybe even 3 or 4 games, but that is going to be exceedingly limiting once you're talking about, getting a lot of games downloaded. You can always delete games, reinstall them, but is that the ideal thing to do? Not in my opinion, so probably going to need some sort of external storage as well, or some additional to go in with it. But that's $629, and I think that's pretty decent, all things considered. So that's gonna wrap up this one. Again, still not a great time to buy a PC, but the rhetoric of, just wait until prices get back to normal. I mean, I've been saying that for quite a while, and yes, while that would be ideal, we don't know how long this is gonna persist for. And we're talking about, GPUs that aren't even out yet already being sold at marked up values, which is going on right now. The market is kind of really hard to actually pin down and understand where it's going to go in the next, 4 to 6 weeks, mind you, then 3 to 6 months, or who knows where we're even going to be in 9 months in the holiday season. So, going to give you guys updates every month, but this is what I'm seeing right now. That's going to wrap up this one. Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you guys have a request for a future video, you can leave that in the comments as well, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.